Good morning everyone. Sorry to interrupt your discussions, and thank you very much for being here. I know some of us had a bit of a late night after that fantastic speech, very meaningful speech from Gideon Levy. We're very, very happy that he's the recipient of the 2025 City of Athens Democracy Award. This morning we have a very, very special session for you. Courtesy of the Doha Forum. I was in Doha and at the Doha Forum last year, together with the General Manager, Maha Al-Kuvari, and the Content Director, Rob Wood. And we did a panel together. We started getting to know each other, forum to forum. And this morning we've decided and actually signed an agreement for an ongoing partnership between Doha Forum and the Athens Democracy Forum. In these turbulent times, it is very important, of course, for forums like ours that bring important policymakers and civil society leaders to come together and partner. Together we're much stronger. And actually I was in Doha on the day of the bombing, that very unfortunate day, and that made me realize that these partnerships are much more meaningful. So I would like to thank Doha Forum for their support for this morning's breakfast briefing. It's a very timely topic. Rob and I have been speaking about this for a very long time, and we never thought that it was going to be under the circumstances that we are faced with in the last few weeks. Dr. Majed Al-Ansari, the spokesperson of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the advisor to the Prime Minister, unfortunately is not able to join us this morning, but we are very happy that in his place we have Rashid Al-Mohanadi, who's a very senior advisor, the chief advisor, I would say, to Dr. Majed. And we will hear from him, and Jyoti Thottam, our moderator, journalist from the New York Times. But before that, I'd like to call on you, Maha Al-Kuvari, to just say welcome to everybody, and then we're looking forward to the conversation on diplomacy in times of conflict.
Good morning, Excellencies, distinguished guests, colleagues and friends. On behalf of Doha Forum, it's my pleasure to welcome you to this special breakfast briefing on the role of diplomacy in times of conflict. As we gather here in Athens, we are reminded that dialogue is not a luxury, it's a necessary. In an increasingly complex world, diplomacy remains one of the most and imperative tools that we have to prevent from escalating, to mediate disputes and to open channel of understanding when doors seem closed. Qatar has long believed in the power of dialogue and engagement, and this session reflects this spirit. I would like to thank you all, and also to thank our distinguished speaker and moderator, and I look forward to the insight that will emerge from this important conversation. Thank you all, and let's begin.
Okay, welcome. Welcome to all of you, and thank you for joining us this morning. Really happy to be here. And Rashid, as we heard, now this idea, diplomacy in times of conflict, we usually think about superpowers as the main actors when it comes to diplomacy and conflict. But Qatar is unusual, certainly in the region and perhaps around the world, in having taken I would say a fair, strategic decision many years ago to invest in diplomacy, in mediation, to be a player that is engaged with all the other players in the region and increasingly around the world. And as Achilles said, all of that seems to have come to a head these last few weeks. And I'll tell you, from the outside, from our newsroom, there's a perception that the events of the last few weeks, particularly the Israeli strike on Qatar, might have actually called that strategy into question, because it, clearly did not prevent conflict from coming right to your doorstep. So rather than sort of starting with a softball, I know you can handle it, but I'd love to hear your response to that.
So good morning, everybody. I think it's very challenging being the first speaker because I have to wake everybody up. So Kalimera, good morning. You mentioned superpowers, and I think we live in an age where the size of nations, the populations don't dictate influence. What dictates influence is smart strategy. And Qatar, since the late 90s, early 2000s, has viewed mediation as a tool of foreign policy, not just of conflict resolution. Because we truly believe that we live in an interconnected system. What happens next door will soon bite us in the back. The events of the last few months, from June to September. In June, as you know, we have been attacked by Iran. They launched 20 missiles, and we were able to intercept 19 out of the 20. That was in the height of the 12-day war. And the 12-day war, by the way, is the 11-day war. You just need to count the days. And Qatar had two choices. One was to escalate. Iran attacked us. Why don't we go attack Iran? We have the GCC, we have America. But Qatar decided on, no, I will use this chance to reach a ceasefire. The ceasefire, which in my opinion was a very fragile one because both parties did not achieve their objectives, to this day stands. So we were able to save the life of Israelis and Iranians. The attack on Qatar in the 9th of September is different.
Okay.
Why is it different? When the reason Iran attacked Qatar is because Iranian leaders have for years said, if the US attacks the Iranian mainland, we will attack US interests in the Gulf. The Israeli attack happened in the middle of a mediation. They targeted a negotiating team that was in the middle of looking at one of the proposals. And we lost one of our guys. Badr al-Dosari lost his life, a 22-year-old Qatari security officer. And the negotiation team did not die. And I think that historical coincidence gave us the opportunity to reach where we are now, which is the closest point we're ever at to potentially reach some sort of solution in Gaza. Not perfect, there is no perfect solution. But I think the situation, it was a challenge, it was a threat, but this threat and challenge turned to an opportunity, which first of all provided Qatar with the security guarantees it wanted. As you may know, 2 days ago, President Trump signed an executive order giving Qatar Article 5 level of security guarantees, which is unprecedented. I used ChatGPT to check. So there is no precedent of a similar situation. Of course, it's an executive order that can be changed by the next president.
Sure.
But at least for this mediation, Qatar is secure because Israel has proved that it does not care about borders, it does not care about international law. But at least now, with some level of guarantee, we can continue with the mediation.
Okay. So, I mean, that's at the level of governments, policymakers. You secured that agreement. What I'm interested in is from the point of view of people in Qatar. And as we've discussed, that's not a point of view one hears often. If the promise for people is we'll deliver a stable, secure environment for you, how do you justify the sacrifice, basically, that you have asked people to make in order for the country to play that mediating role?
That's a really good question. So in the early 2000s, the Qatari people were asked to vote for a petition for a new constitution. The new constitution included major governance changes, one of which was to add to the Constitution that mediation is the prime tool for foreign policy. You can go online and you can find it in our Constitution. So the Qatari people voted in this new Constitution, and the Qatari people believe that solving the region's problems will make us more secure. And I know this sounds, very close to the liberal, heritage of thought, but there's a lot of realism and realpolitik behind it, because we believe that if the issues in Lebanon, Israel, Palestine, Iran are not solved, then we cannot prosper. It comes back to this, Arab idea that I cannot sleep if my neighbor is hungry. And I think the Qatari people, even though we've sustained a lot of sacrifices, especially in the last few months, we believe this is the only way to go, because if Qatar doesn't do it, who will? Nobody has the access, nobody has the experience. The Qatari model of mediation has proved very successful. We have the hiccup with the Israelis, but hopefully...
We'll see if it proves to be successful. I know everyone is hopeful, but...
For this one, but we have, in the last 2 decades, mediated 10 successful conflicts with different, results. We mediated the Darfur conflict. We stopped one of the most bloodiest conflicts in Africa. One of the interesting conflicts we're mediating now is between Colombia, the government of Colombia, and I'm trying to remember the name, Gianista self-proclaimed army, which is a non-state actor in the north of Colombia. And this came by the request of Bogota. We had the first round last month in Doha, and it was the first direct contact between the government of Colombia and this non-state actor. So the Gaza-Israel mediation is the most difficult. It's the most challenging, because it is one of the few conflicts that in the midst of the mediation, both parties don't want to reach a solution. But for the other mediations, they're usually fed up with the conflict and they want a resolution.
Right. So clearly Qatar has made this a specialty, the signature of your foreign policy. The international forum for this kind of thing, traditionally, for the last 80 years, has been the United Nations and its associated venues. We're just a week out of UNGA. I know you were there. There was a lot of discussion that week about 80 years on, is the UN even fit for purpose? Like, does that forum still make sense? There was actually a very interesting speech by the leader of Finland, where he put forth his view of the role of small states like Finland, like I would assume like Qatar as well, as sort of exerting their power and influence through cooperation in forums like the UN. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the relevance of multilateral institutions like that right now.
So for small states like Qatar, like Finland, like Greece, multilateralism is very important because it offers this ability for us to talk and have discussions. Unfortunately, I would tell people, would you drive an 80-year-old car? And the answer would be most likely no. The UN needs changes, the UN needs, but it's the only forum we have which brings everybody together. The comments of the Prime Minister of Finland, I think, was well in place. Especially the Security Council needs a lot of renewals. But I don't see a system that is far away from multilateralism, especially for small states. We do see a newfound form of regionalism, like, Qatar is mediating outside the normal boundaries of the UN. But the UN does offer the UN still delivers some value.
So you see those two systems, the broader multilateral system and these regional groupings kind of
complementary,
working in tandem.
There's a level of complementarity between both.
So I want to press a little bit more on the regional groupings. I'm curious to hear either within your region or perhaps even in other regions. What are some other countries whose approach to diplomacy you admire or you feel Qatar can learn from?
That's a very difficult question because I think Qatari diplomacy has proved that it's, very, very well versed when it comes to achieving national objectives. But I think we can look at peace-loving nations around the world and see where we can find areas of synergy. And I think small states that still believe in in global order and still believe in international law should find forums to engage and have dialogue, maybe outside of the UN. We see some of these organizations like there's the Organization of the Least Developed Nations, organizations which bring together states of the global south. These are areas where, and these are spaces where states that rely on multilateralism can have dialogue and discussion.
Okay, Singapore, I'm going to give you some examples. Singapore, what do you think of their approach?
I think the Singaporean approach, I'm not an expert on Singapore, but the Singaporean approach is good for the situation in Southeast Asia. Southeast Asia is relatively stable. Most of their border issues have been solved. The Middle East needs an innovative approach to diplomacy and to conflict resolution. And I think no imported system can solve our problems. I always say regional problems need regional solutions. But Singapore, for example, is a small state that exerts a lot of influence. Qatar has really good relations with Singapore. And we exchange a lot of learnings. And I think with, unfortunately, the instability in Southeast Asia now with, Thailand, we were just discussing about it, Cambodia and Thailand and the disaster in Myanmar, Southeast Asia could actually learn a lot from the Middle East.
Interesting. Okay, I'm going to ask you one more comparison. I know these are hard, but how about India? Again, not a small state, big state, but interestingly has also historically tried to make a virtue of engaging with many, many different actors around the world. The conventional wisdom is that that's not working out so well right now for India. What's your view?
So, also not an expert on India. I think maybe you can answer that because you studied India very closely. But in the end, India as a state has decided not to be part of any pole, either in the bipolar system of the Cold War or a multipolar system that we're seeing forming now. It has short-term issues, but I believe when a state decides to engage with most parties, there are usually medium to long-term gains.
Okay, so I'm glad you mentioned the word multipolarity. So for the foreign policy experts in the room, I know it's a buzzword, but there is a point of view that the multipolar world is really just a nice way of saying it's all about transactionalism. We're just, what can you do for me? What can I do for you? Do you think that's fair? And how does, there are also some who would describe Qatar's approach to its relations, certainly with the United States, as transactional. What's your view of that?
So let's focus on the Qatari relation with the US. Qatar had very limited ties with the US until the invasion of Kuwait. And I'll give you a little small fact. Qatar, since 1985 to 1991, had an arms embargo from the US. So the US barred arms sales to Qatar, only lifted after Qatar participated in Desert Storm. 4 years later, we have Al-Udeid. I think the relationship between the United States and Qatar is not fully transactional. There's always this level of transactionality between relationships, because if there's none, then there's no relationship. But I think the US views Qatar as an important partner for achieving US national interest, which is stability in the Middle East, because the Middle East is a big source of funding, FDI, and energy. And the world needs energy. Even if the US is energy self-sufficient, if the US wants to still become still stay the global hegemon, they need to make sure that their allies and their partners get energy and get the investments they need.
So digging in on the United States a little bit, again, a critique right now of this administration is that it's going around the world, making agreements, trying to make deals, trying to make agreements, but it's not entirely clear, can you hold the United States accountable to those agreements? Like, how do you enforce the terms of the deal? How does Qatar, how do you view that problem?
I think this is a question that we need to ask our American friends. But you know, when you're managing the global sphere, you need to take these agreements initially at face value and then see how things go. If agreements are hold, then they are hold. If they are not, then you need to find other options.
But you're optimistic that this security guarantee will hold?
At least for a few years.
What would give you pause? Meaning, like, right now, the NATO countries, they've really kind of been around the block with the Trump administration about the American commitment to NATO, which at one point was considered ironclad. Like, when you see what the NATO countries have gone through, what are the lessons you might take?
I think we need to differentiate between what's being said in the news as narrative and what's actually on the ground. As an observer, I see the US commitment to NATO is still there. We have hundreds of US planes here in Europe, tanker planes flying around, doing intelligence missions near Ukraine and near Russia. I think what we're seeing is mostly rhetoric, but from an operational level, NATO is still quite a solid bloc from an outside observer.
Right. And actually, I think your observations seem to track with, I don't know if my colleague Steve Erlanger is here, but he's really the expert on NATO, and that's fairly consistent with what he tells me he has been reporting. So I wanted to, and I'd like to invite the audience. Soon I have a couple of more tough questions for you, but I'd love to invite the audience to jump in whenever you're ready. But in the spirit of this forum, you know, since we are at the Athens Democracy Forum, now in partnership with the Doha Forum, Qatar is not a democracy, as in case anyone was wondering. But you know, you make a very persuasive, a compelling case for, you know, why that's okay, like the benefits of that, the subject of last night's very lively discussion. I'm curious to hear from you, how would you make the case for Qatar's system as delivering, I guess, for people what many democracies feel that only democracy can deliver?
So since we're in the birthplace of democracy and philosophy, we need to ask a philosophical question. What's the purpose of government? Why do we have governments? Why are they there? You can say one idea is that it needs to represent the people, but another idea is it needs to deliver for the people. So if a system is designed in a way to deliver results, why should I go pick at, no, you need to do it this way and that way? And we had this discussion last night. And I see, unfortunately, a lot of people have a linear view of history. So we started in our caves, and then we became tribes, and then we formed city-states, and then, you know, the end game is democracy. I have a different view. I think whatever system delivers to its citizens is the system we should adopt. Are all systems perfect? No, they're all imperfect, and you need to change. But the Qatar case, for example, in the constitution the people voted in 2003, had a sort of elected parliament through the Shura Council, which was implemented a few years back. The people were asked again, do you still want an elected parliament? Through an open petition monitored by the UN and other global organizations. And can you guess what the people decided on?
You tell me.
Abolishing the election system.
Okay.
The reason is the election system introduced some level of partisanship, which the Qatari people didn't want to face, because the government is already delivering. The government is delivering on development, education, health. The government is delivering on our foreign policy objectives. An example of a similar system would be the country you mentioned earlier, Singapore. Mm-hmm. Singapore at face value is a democracy, but it's ruled by the same party since its establishment and ruled by the same person for decades. Is Singapore delivering on its promises to its people? Most of the cases, yes. So I always urge people not to have a Eurocentric view of how people govern each other, and we should widen the lens and see what system works. If Western-style democracy works for a state, then it works. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. And let's look at the entire Arab world. The most stable systems that are delivering on their developmental goals are mostly monarchies. The democracies in the Levant and North Africa aren't doing so well.
So if history is not linear, if things can change and maybe continue to change, do you think it's possible that at some point, maybe generations from now, there may be a version of Qatar where people are not satisfied with the system you have in place now and might want something radically different?
Well, if history tells us everything, there is only one constant, which is change. And if the situation changes, the Qatari people in the last 200 years, we have a long history that we're very proud of, and unfortunately, maybe on us, not a lot of people are aware of. In the 200 years of Qatar, we've seen many changes, and we've faced the British Empire, and we faced the Ottomans, and before that we faced the Portuguese. And for every challenge, we had a different system. If conditions change, then we need to adapt.
Okay, I'd love to throw it open to questions now. We covered a lot of ground, some philosophy, some foreign policy. Yes, I see a question in the back. Go ahead.
Thank you so much. My name is Pedro Roque. I'm a member of the Portuguese Parliament. I'm here in my capacity as Vice President of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Mediterranean that gathers all member parliaments around the Mediterranean basin, and also some countries of the Gulf, like Qatar. The Shura of Qatar is our proudly member. I want to talk about one thing, that is parliamentary diplomacy. We on our board, we have since our reception the Knesset of Israel and the Palestinian National Council as vice presidents. They talk with each other for so many years, even in current times, difficult current times for the region. We also interfere in other issues like the Cyprus dispute, Lebanon, etc. What's your view about the parliamentary diplomacy? How can be helpful to the normal diplomacy of governments achieving peace? Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Great. So just to repeat the question briefly, the question was about the role of parliamentarians playing a role in diplomacy. What's your view?
So Qatar has, and you know very well, a Shura Council. The Shura Council for some time was elected, now it's appointed. The Shura Council acts as the oversight over government performance. This Shura Council is utilized, and the members are very active when it comes to parliamentary diplomacy. In all of the events related to different parliaments, members of our Shura Council go represent Qatar. I think parliamentary diplomacy is very important because it comes back to a point you mentioned, which is people-to-people relations and the role of actual people when it comes to diplomacy. So I think, parliamentary diplomacy is an important part of an integrated diplomacy strategy, which includes cultural diplomacy, military diplomacy, economic diplomacy. So we can't look at it just as a singular part.
Okay, a question from the front, yes.
Thank you. Good morning. Thank you so much for the discussion. I'm Meredith Preston McGee. I'm the Secretary General for the Global Center for Pluralism, based in Canada, part of the Canadian delegation here. And I'd be curious, given the role that Qatar plays on mediation and conflict resolution, we hear so much about the transactional nature of these deals and, quite frankly, a concern about the surface level of a lot of these agreements. Given Qatar's experience around the world, I'd be interested in you talking a little bit on inclusion in those processes, how you actually engage with others, how you really genuinely bring the people into those conversations and along with the agreements. Thanks.
That's a great question. Again, about transactionalism and, when you are making these deals that are essentially between governments, how do you include other voices?
That's a very good question. I can actually give an example. So in December last year, the Syrian government fell. A new government came. The new government, its open knowledge, is supported by the Gulf states and by Turkey. Qatari diplomats, and I've seen this firsthand, pressed on the Syrian government, you need to include the minorities. And Syria has many minorities, and there are many fault lines. We have the Druze in the south, where Israel is utilizing their relationship with the Druze in the Golan to cause some instability. We have the Kurds in the north, we have the Alawites in the west. So what Qatar usually does is it presses the partners to include. Another example would be Afghanistan. Since 2012, we've been asked by your big neighbor to the south, the US, to mediate between the Taliban and the United States. This mediation, of course, in the end, the US appointed government in Kabul fell, the Taliban took over. Qatar, because we had the relationship with the Taliban, we were able to evacuate 100,000 people from Kabul. The only planes landing in Kabul were Qatar Emiri Air Force planes and Qatar Airways planes. And in the same case, we went to the government, the new government and the Taliban. You need to include minorities. The maximum what a state Qatar can do is push and keep pushing. Because if we do not include the minorities in any mediated solution, then the solution is temporary. Then a marginalized group will feel that they have a lot of grievances, and it will turn into an armed resistance. The same thing what's happening between the Israelis and the Palestinians. So very important point. And minority rights are paramount to Qatar's foreign policy.
Just to build on that, was there any discussion of, during that difficult time, of what the future would look like for women in Afghanistan? I don't consider them a minority group, but go ahead.
No, it's very important. I had discussions with our diplomats in Kabul, and it is a constant agenda item, women's rights. Qatar actually hosted, there is this women's robotic team in Afghanistan that were very active during the previous government. Qatar evacuated that team. Most of them are still in Doha. The other are seeing their opportunities around the world. But I can guarantee it's a constant agenda item when we're discussing with the current government in Kabul. Is it perfect? No. Are they adhering to everything? No. Should we stop pushing? No. We need to keep pushing. And it comes back to the question, how can I force that if I don't convince them? And honestly, I've been involved in some of the discussions with Afghanistan. I am seeing some change. Is it at the speed we want? No. But is change happening? Yes. And the only way is to keep pushing. Because if we stop pushing, then the groups will be marginalized again.
Go ahead, in the back. Go ahead.
Thank you very much for contributing to this conversation. I'm Gabor Sharing. I'm an assistant professor at Georgetown University in Qatar. It's a great pleasure to hear you talk about these issues. And I teach populism to my students. This year, overwhelming majority are Qataris, most of them girls. And they are really bright students and aspire to be forces for positive change in the world. So I want to bring back something to Doha as points of discussions. And populism and democracy, these are two of the biggest questions that occupy people's minds around the world. So you talked a lot about stability and mediation. How would you say, what is Qatar's role when it comes to the illiberalism or authoritarian populism? How would you position your country in that relationship? Thank you.
That's a great provocative question. How would you position Qatar in relation to those authoritarian and or populist states?
Excellent. I'm happy to see our academics here in Athens. It's a very good question. And I think it's a question of governance systems. So you have, I'll give an actual example. Look at the government of Israel. And I had this amazing discussion with the deputy foreign minister who isn't here, that the system in Israel, because of the way it's managed, the electoral system, it pushes a lot of the right-wing agenda. And it pushes a lot of populist agenda. And it's a question of how are we managing our electoral system. In Qatar, because we are not a Western-style democracy, we don't have this issue of the rise of populism, the rise of illiberalism. And I think it's an issue with Western-style democracies that need a solution from within the electoral system to manage that out. As an observer, populism is on the rise. And I think the only way to combat it is more dialogue. And what I'm seeing in the West is this high level of polarization. Nobody wants to talk to each other. And you have this, if you're on one side of the discussion, you villainize the person on the other side of the discussion. And unfortunately, it's a trajectory. And you can see it in the US.
Mm-hmm. So again, building on that question, certainly in Western-style democracies, we see what's happening, the rise of populism as a threat to our systems. Do you view the kind of turmoil that's being generated by the rise of populism as a threat to the stability of a state like Qatar?
When it happens in states that are directly affecting Qatar, like, for example, Israel. Mm-hmm. So Israel is a state in our region. It is governed by very radical, radical leaders. And because it's governed by radical leaders, they make these decisions sometimes for domestic reasons, to bomb sovereign states. So it is a threat. What can we do about it? More mediation and dialogue. And I think we need to form this coalition of willing states that still believe in global order to combat it. But is it directly an issue that the Gulf states face? No, because we don't have this, a wave of populism sweeping through the Gulf because of the way we are governed. But it may be a threat. It may, and with the case of Israel, it is.
Mm-hmm. Okay, there's a couple of questions in the back. Go ahead.
So you've got a unique situation in Qatar with migration, right? You've got a country where the majority of the population would be classified as migrants. So I'm hoping that you could talk a little bit about the concept of nation state, right, or nation and a Qatari nation. You made a few reference to the Qatari people want this, or we're delivering for the Qatari people. What is this concept of Qatari people in a unique situation like yours? How is it changing? Will it change?
Mm-hmm. It's a great question about, essentially about the nature of citizenship, like the Qatari state. You talk about Qatari citizens, 350 50,000, I think, people. But there are, of course, many, many non-citizens who are also part of the country, in a sense. Like, how do you view their needs and desires?
Of course. So just to give context to everybody, Qatar is a very unique country where the citizens are a minority. Out of the 2.7 million people in Qatar, most of them are, non-Qataris from 180 countries around the world. We're just missing 12 countries. That's the last time I checked. It is a unique situation. There is this sort of social contract between the people that lived in Qatar before, we started developing, and the arrangement we have with non-Qataris is Qatar is a place to work, live, find your livelihood. We have examples here in the audience. The question of citizenry was always brought up, and the decision was made, collectively within the people living in Qatar before that, the concept of citizenry is very specific, but there are ways to become Qatari citizens. So the main focus of the Qatari government when it comes to non-Qatari citizens is that we provide the same services, but not the same political rights. Because Qatari citizens have their own political rights, but in terms of services, education, development, economic opportunities, it is almost the same. So that's how we manage it. Another country in the region that has the same situation is the UAE, and both of us are managing it basically the same. The concept of a nation state is also a Western developed concept, post the Westphalia Treaty, which sometimes we try to take the concept and shove it down different examples around the world. And I think sometimes pushing these concepts where they are not applicable causes a lot of instability. And we see it with some post-colonial states where we try to push, you have to be governed this way. And if you're not governed this way, then something is wrong. And in the end, we get a lot of instability issues and local social strife.
Although if I may press you, even setting aside the sort of post-war nation states, if you look at the broader scope of history, it has not proved very stable to have a small group of people governing a much larger group of people without the same rights. Is that a concern for you?
Well, we need to define what are rights. So is our rights, safety, security, economic opportunity, or is right just the ability to throw a paper in a poll? When it comes to safety, security, and economic opportunity, honestly, in Qatar, I think the fact that most of the population aren't Qatari, I think shows that we're delivering something to these non-Qataris, which is things that they cannot get back in their home states. I would disagree with that because we have examples of expats living in Qatar for 40 years. Why haven't they left?
I think there's one more question in the back, and then we'll come back to you. Go ahead.
Thank you. My name is Qi Wen, a student studying political science and economics at Franklin University, Switzerland. My question is, how does the Islamic religion as the unifying factor in the Middle East play a role in shaping the future of Middle East? In terms of how to bring harmony back into the region after the war, and also considering investment strategies on energy transition and maybe AI development, is it possible to finance the development and transition under the principle of Islamic finance? And also, what is your strategy on that? So just to conclude, my question is on the role of Islam as unifying force on the matter of both politics and finance and business. Thank you.
Very broad question, but raising some interesting ideas, basically about how you see the role of Islamic principles in governance and finance. You can perhaps choose one of those since we don't have a lot of time.
So I think it's, sometimes we ask questions about Islam. If we go and ask the same questions about Christianity, we say this is, ludicrous. Islam is part of the social fabric of the Middle East. Judaism is part of the social fabric of the Middle East. Christianity is, Zoroastrianism is, I think we have one of the most congested religious spheres in the world. Because of globalization, I think some of these concepts are either adapted to globalization or even sometimes honestly set aside if it affects if it affects progress. With Islamic finance is I'm not an expert, but I've monitored the sphere, is a concept that has been developed in the last 50 years to adhere to the beliefs of people, saying that I don't want to, work on usury. The same example would be the kosher food scene in the US. It is, a sector that has been developed to satisfy the needs of people who think that this is how I should live my life. And I don't think that it's contradicting with any of the global principles or globalization. It's complementary and it's integrated within the system.
Okay. I think this will have to be our last question. Go ahead. We have a few minutes? Okay. No, I think this will be the last.
Thank you. Bob Harris, a retired, long-serving activist of civil society. I've lived in Switzerland. Switzerland's been my home for almost 50 years, and so I identify with the points that you've made about the role that small states can play in mediation and diplomacy. My particular question today is, what sort of contacts and interaction do you have with the Office of the Secretary General of the United Nations and the Under-Secretaries General who are responsible for peace building and peace operations?
Okay, very specific question about the UN. Go ahead.
That's good. 9th of September, just to remind everybody, we were bombed by Israel. What was the first thing we did? We talked to the United Nations. We had an emergency Security Council session on this. And as the UN does, it issued a statement condemning Israel. One of the few, I counted them. I used ChatGPT to count them also. Qatar, as a country, still believes in multilateral organizations. We still operate within them. We have very close relations with the United Nations. And to prove it is, as soon as we got bombed, the first organization that we convened a meeting in was the UN Security Council. Is the UN Security Council perfect? No. But it's still one of the tools that we have to use to achieve peace and stability. Yeah.
Okay.
Please.
Sure.
United Nations, my specific question was the role of the United Nations Secretariat in the mediation of international disputes.
Okay.
As distinct from the Security Council itself.
Okay.
That's clearer. So in some of the mediations, the UN Secretariat is involved. With most of the mediations, it is the first party, the second party, and the mediator. So they are not fully involved in all of the mediations. Honestly, that's a good thing because some of the parties we deal with don't believe in multilateralism. So when you bring them to the table and the UN comes to the table, some people will not talk.
Okay, so again, an example of these systems working in tandem, and looks like at least for the foreseeable future that's going to continue to happen in a world in flux. And I would just like to thank you again for entertaining all of our questions in this very robust discussion. Thank you.
Thank you.